Oh, yeah, we are all one big area.
That would be just
Oh, how are we doing today? Are we ready to go?
about hopefully just trying to get the
Okay.
let me get the recording started. All right. Are you ready?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization. How about if we go around the table and introduce ourselves? Phil, before you take a bite, do you want to start?
Phil Chang, Deschutes County Commissioner.
Thank you.
Bob Townsend, ODOT Area Manager.
Greg Bryant, Deschutes Woods.
Tyler Diekey, Bend MPO staff.
Andrea Napoli, Bend MPO.
R.E. Mendez, Bend City Councilor.
And I'm Barb Campbell. I am the chair of the Bend MPO and I serve on the Bend City Council. All right. How have we got anyone online we ought to introduce?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Tarek Rawlings with Deschutes County as well. Thanks.
Hi, Tarek. Thank you. Great. All right. Number 2, Tyler, want to talk to us about meeting guidelines?
Yes, I think this is Tarek. You know how to do this, but I'll just mention it quickly. This meeting's being recorded. You can raise your hand if you have a question online, or you can just interrupt. There's a live transcript function available as well. And with that, I'll just move to the next item.
All right. The next item is public comment. If anyone would like to address the board of the Bend MPO. Seeing none, we'll move right along to item number 4. These are the approval of the meeting minutes. I would look for a motion to approve meeting minutes.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from July 21st, 2023.
Second.
Great. We have a motion from Councilor Mendez and a second from Mr. Townsend. All those in favor, please say aye.
Hi.
Aye, and that is unanimous. Thank you. That brings us along to agenda item number 5, our MPO boundary adjustment. We were able to discuss this some at our last meeting, and this is a continuation of that. Tyler and Andrea will take us through this item.
All right, so just a quick refresher, after each census, the MPO boundary or the urbanized area is updated by the Census Bureau. When we step through a process and to make sure to look and see if there are any other adjustments to the boundary that should be made to accommodate future growth within the MPO area. And then ultimately, we will make these recommendations to ODOT, and then they package them and submit them to the governor for her review and approval. This map shows our current MPO boundary, and the MPO boundary is the red line on the periphery. And if you can see, there's a dashed line shows the current City of Bend urban growth boundary or city limits. And then the yellowish areas on there, the tan areas, those are urban growth boundary expansion areas that were identified back in 2016, 2017 by the city. Any questions so far?
Nope.
So do you want to?
Yeah, let me try and share my screen because I have the app the website.
Yeah, Andrea is going to pull up the online version of the map. And we can walk through those potential changes with everyone.
Perfect. Okay, so here we have the existing MPO boundary. And then we reviewed last time the 2020 revisions to the Bend urbanized area, which is shown in blue. And we do need to incorporate these new blue areas into our MPO boundary, as we had discussed at the last meeting. So if we zoom in here, we have the Widgie area on the south side of Century Drive, and this area here, which Tyler, I think you have the history on that one a little bit.
Yeah, that's the solar farm south of Big Sky Park.
Right.
It's primarily solar. There's other uses there.
Heavy population density.
Yeah,
I was gonna say.
it's quail possibly.
And then with that, so the areas here that you see hatched, those have been adjusted by ODOT to incorporate into, so the new urbanized area then gets edited to include other lands based on existing city boundaries, roadways, areas to be developed in the next 20 years. So that's the hatched area, which would then be the federal aid urbanized boundary. So that is what we would need MPO board, not necessarily action on, but agreement on if there's any edits to that. And then additionally, looking at revisions to the MPO boundary based on both this hatched area and the blue area and our existing MPO boundary.
Which is the brown.
Oh, the brown is the
That's the
existing
existing.
MPO boundary.
Yeah, and I have. We'd talked last time about, a few things, wanting to make sure, I think our recommendation is to go boundary as closely as possible. And so that would include, that would include the lands. If you look on the west side, for instance, the area that's hatched, that's the urban growth boundary expansion area that's north of Skyliner, I believe. And then that area south is the Tethero area. And we had added that back in 2017. And just given the development out there, we think it's worthwhile keeping that included in the boundary. The lands to the southeast, on the east and southeast area and the northeast, I think personally that makes sense just to maintain that existing boundary. And then the only other recommendation, can you zoom in on the Baker Road interchange
right.
area?
Yes.
So I would think, just given ODOT's finishing a planning process right now for the Baker Road interchange, and you can see that the boundary doesn't fully encompass the interchange, and I think we would recommend that the boundary include that, because the interchange area management plan for that includes pretty significant upgrades of that interchange over the next 10 to 15 years, depending upon the funding availability. And so including that, we think would be beneficial as well. Is there anything else that I've missed, Andrea?
So Tyler, do you mean that we would come east all along and include Highway 97 down to that south edge?
I don't know if we need to do that, but I would take that area where the interchange is and the line kind of cuts just right through the interchange.
Oh, is
I would-
that the Baker interchange up?
Yeah.
Can you, oh, it's there.
I would pull that line south a little bit to make sure that
Got it.
we're able to incorporate the potential improvements that are identified in the plan for that interchange area.
So where they're showing this ODOT adjustment?
More than that, I think we would need to look at the final set of recommendations that are going to be included in that plan and expand it, I think, a little bit more than that. Because given the layout, they're talking, potentially roundabouts, different interchange
that is true.
terminals,
Yeah.
trail improvements and other things that are a little bit bigger than that existing footprint that's out there today.
Kind of play that thought out a little bit farther. When we were hearing about the design process for the Baker Knott interchange, there were significant concerns raised about emergency egress out of Deschutes River Woods for fire or other type situations. And I don't know whether any of the potential egress opportunities lie even farther south than the Baker interchange, but there might be reason to fill in that band in between 97 and the rest of Deschutes River Woods.
Does this show the High Desert Museum, or at least the access point?
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question?
If that's helpful at all if it would be helpful at all to have that little band strip included to address these egress considerations.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Greg Bryant, what it is, no, we're also looking at a possible interchange in the southern part. I believe there's, that possibility, and I'm wondering if that would behoove us if we included that into the metropolitan area. That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, the Deschutes County, or Tarek can speak to this, but the Deschutes County TSP is going to include potential interchange just south of High Desert Museum.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm wondering also if that would help with your path that you're paving on the
Yeah, I mean, I don't know
western side.
if it helps. I mean, it helps for interchanges more because it just opens up the opportunity for other funding and support from the MPO.
Right.
The path, whether it helps or hurts, it probably doesn't really. But there is going to be something in the Deschutes County TSP for an interchange there.
Good. That was the other clarifying point I was going to ask is would it make sense then you had to pull the boundary along Highway 97 east, a little bit east of Highway 97 and all the way down to the south border here that's currently in place.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I have yet to hear a really good reason why something ever, I mean, obviously we want to be, judicial in where we put the MPO boundaries, but I've never heard I don't want to be within the MPO boundaries or something shouldn't be if there's a nexus, right? I mean, obviously we're not expanding to all of Deschutes County, but unless someone has a reason like, well, then you don't get this funding or you don't get that, then I generally would be on the other side of that.
Do we know what the land ownership is in that little band between 97 and the existing boundary?
For BNSF and ODOT for that first portion.
Yeah.
There's
And then
as
we
you
have-
get closer to Baker, then there's private.
I mean, I feel like there is maybe some, maybe even however small, expand to include 97 and even a little bit on the other side for the path and maybe potentially for interchanges. Just on the chance that it does open up a future possible project. If, something comes up and there's a need for something that maybe this would make a project eligible for that it otherwise wouldn't be. That seems like an advantage, even if it's a remote possibility.
Yeah, or David joined. David, is there any concern like if this area was expanded into the MPO boundaries along Baker Road or Baker Interchange specifically, and then south along Highway 97 to the edge of this Deschutes River Woods?
You asking if there's a concern if it were expanded into the MPO boundary or the city's federal aid urban boundary?
MPO.
I think I would defer to Tyler and Andrea on that.
But from ODOT standpoint, it doesn't, we don't have any reason not to,
No.
It seems, I know that the way the MPOs are defined is by population, but the point of the MPOs is transportation planning. And 97 is one of those roads that is it's an ODOT facility near our city. It just seems strange that we wouldn't have it if we're going all that far down to include the population. Why wouldn't we also include the road that actually is part of one of our members? Do you know what I mean? That's
Yeah,
It
I
is
think
the key transportation corridor for that area.
exactly right. You know, why are we? Yeah.
Does that make it easier for the southern, if that happens, the southern interchange there to be there or not? Does it matter?
The MPO doesn't really matter for that, other than it may open up an opportunity, but it's still some of the same hoops we have to jump through.
Yeah,
Whether it's, it'd be different if the urban growth boundary was that.
Right.
Yeah, down there.
Right.
Okay. So Tyler, do you want like a specific motion at this time? I'm sorry, that we expand the boundary down there to the east to include Highway 97. How are we gonna, get through completing this whole thing?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think if we note, if we note them, I mean, at the end, when we the board
Sure.
make a motion,
Okay,
we can just list those items or just say, as discussed during the meeting.
Great.
possibly.
great.
I think we've discussed two things so far,
Okay,
or three things. We've got this extension south along Highway 97, maintaining the existing MPO boundary.
Yep.
As it is, and then adding the two primary blue shaded areas, so that
Woodgie
Woodgie
area.
Creek, Seventh Mountain area, as well as the solar farm. And then the fourth issue is the Tumalo.
that's Tumalo, yeah.
And so will you scroll up to that?
Yeah, and Tyler, to clarify, so if looking at adding in this section 97, would then the MPO border align with ODOT's right of way in the front 97?
Would that make sense, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It's not arbitrary. Or David, did you have something? Oh,
I can wait. I was just gonna make a comment on some other areas where the FOB and the MPO boundary are close to aligning but don't, and might be worth considering whether we want to align them. And then a couple of areas that were included in the 2010 FOB that might make sense to do a check on the 2020 FOB and MPO boundary and see if we want to carry those forward from 2010. But I can wait until you guys.
Bob,
Sorry,
Sorry,
federal aid urban boundary.
what, say it again?
Federal aid urban boundary.
Oh,
these.
Sorry, it's too much of a mouthful, so I just say FOB.
acronyms.
Sure.
Okay. So on that specific question, down to the south, is anyone opposed to the idea of extending our MPO boundary to the east as far as the ODOT right-of-way, and maybe even more to the east to include all of that Baker interchange? I think that's what we've been talking about for the last few minutes down there. I don't see anybody who doesn't like that.
Would
Yeah,
that also include the path?
yeah, because the path's on the west side, isn't it?
Path will
It'll be on the
right away.
Right away.
But
Oh,
it's within ODOT right away.
Okay, good question.
How, can you zoom in on the southern line though? How far?
Sure.
That may not be where the proposed interchange is on the south of Deschutes River Woods there.
Yeah, so it's gonna, because there's Forest Service Road.
Oh, I mean, that's gonna be pretty close
Yeah.
if that line's just carried straight over.
Where is the proposed location?
It's south of south of High Desert. It kind of
Okay.
lines up.
I don't think it's too far south though. is it?
Well, the ramps and everything tie in.
Will have to be just south of the.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there, I can, we have a high level concept plan. I can send it so we can make sure that
Perfect.
Okay. Okay, and then as far as the areas that are colored blue on this map, I thought that those were the spots where we don't have any choice. The federal government is telling us.
That's correct.
Great, okay, great.
I mean, it's, yeah, so I guess
It's the
it's not
area.
real, when I said Woodgie Creek in that area. I mean, you do have to approve it, but we don't have a choice in approval.
Right, got it.
I mean, it's,
Okay. Is anyone interested in expanding further to the west around the Widgie Creek area? We think that what the blue is sufficient over there.
Can somebody just remind me where Tetherow is and all that?
Thanks.
it is that, it's that
The hatched,
just below the hatched.
that,
No,
The hatched area is the urban growth boundary expansion area that's under full development right now.
but Tetherow is already in the MPO boundary.
Yes,
Okay,
So it could be excluded.
it could be excluded because it's not required.
I don't think we
Yeah.
should exclude.
Yeah.
Good question. Okay, I think,
David,
David, is this one area you were,
Well, my hand was raised for that discussion on the Baker interchange, just to kind of bolster or support that argument that the 2010 federal aid urban boundary actually does include the full Baker interchange. So I think that's just another reason to support expanding that boundary.
then before we jump to Tumalo, David, did you want to talk about the MPO boundary and the federal aid urban boundary, some of those discrepancies, the issues or concerns or ideas that you have?
Yeah, I mean, you can
Okay, sure.
see some of them right there where the MPO boundary is slightly different from what's proposed to be the federal aid urban boundary. In my mind, it makes sense to align them. It'll just, I think, make things a lot simpler going forward. You won't be looking at different boundaries that should be the same.
and that federal aid urban boundary also aligns with the UGB?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, in
That
most
should be adjusted.
places. There's a couple other places where they're different, in addition to this, that I think would make sense to align. So if you go up to, like the Shevlin Park entrance, the 2010 federal aid urban boundary actually extended a bit further west. So actually what's shown there for the federal aid urban boundary and the UGB and the MPO, where it triangles off there, the federal aid urban boundary from 2010 actually extends west up to Bull Springs Road. And there may be some value in doing that and extending the MPO boundary there as well. I think that
Are
captures
you-
the,
So David, I'm turning on the 2010 layer is light purple.
yeah, so I think that captures, the entrance to Shevlin Park, which isn't otherwise captured.
okay,
So
any,
that's one area. And then as you go further north, there's a similar sort of discrepancy where the 2010 boundary includes Putnam Road.
Are you talking about this area? There's this,
Exactly. Yep.
although this little section right here, because the existing MPO boundary does include that.
Yeah, so this would be more updating the federal aid urban boundary to match
To match
the
that.
MPO boundary. And then
cute,
the very last one that I would mention is there's just a small section of OB Riley that's
Yes.
outside of the MPO boundary. And it's outside of the MPO boundary and outside the federal aid urban boundary. Generally, we're trying to, as you go north, it's a little bit
This
north.
area.
Just north
That,
Pacific Heights. Yeah, so there's that gap on the west side. And generally, like, as we're doing these updates, we're trying to avoid situations where a road goes from,
Yes.
yeah, that kind of the square that's formed by US 20, Pacific Heights Road, Mountain View Drive, and then Obie Riley. Generally, we're trying to avoid situations where a road kind of weaves in and out of urban and then to rural and then back to urban.
So in practical terms, though, I mean, if this was left where it is, in other words, if it excluded that little strip west of it, or there was some part of Obie Riley that weaved in and out, the practical consequences of that are, I mean, would particular projects be potentially ineligible? Or help me understand what the practical consequence of being in or out is like this.
Yeah, so for urban federal funds, that section of Obie Riley would be ineligible.
But by including it, would it be ineligible for rural federal funds? Or they generally have to be within an MPO, but not in an urbanized area?
Yeah, so if it received, if there were a project that received rural funds, then that section would be ineligible if it were included in the federal aid urban boundary.
Okay, but they still have to be within the MPO rural area to be eligible for those funds. So if they're outside of the MPO boundary, then they're ineligible for the rural federal funding or certain types of rural federal funding?
Yeah, I think I'm talking about the federal aid urban boundary, not the MPO boundary so much. And Tyler and Andrea can speak to the requirements for the MPO boundary.
Okay.
Or fund eligibility.
The odd thing with a section like this is if we had a 4-mile project along Obie Riley and we'd have to separate, like, well, we can't use certain money for this block because it's not within MPO, or furthermore, we wouldn't have any authority over decision making. I mean, not that that's a reason to include it for us to have authority, but it just is an outlier. That's why, generally if a road starts and stops in the MPO, we make sure the whole boundary has it. So we don't have, that's where we get confusion on these colors of money and what can pay for what. It's just it's difficult.
This is a question. I should know this, David, and I don't. In that area, if it's in the federal aid urban boundary, does that impact design type decisions? Yeah, so if let's say it's within the federal aid urban boundary and it receives urban federal dollars, the expectation is that it's designed to urban standards, unless you get I'm not sure if they refer to it as a design exception or a deviation. That's what I thought. And I just wanted to clarify that because I think that's the other issue is if it has to be designed to urban standards, then that means there'd be potential there to then have sidewalks or a trail.
Oh, no.
Make sure there's sufficient bike lanes, that type of thing along, particularly a corridor like this.
I think the gray area here is if we're going to keep the MPO boundaries to the, northwest here the same, then we should include it. If we think we're going to remove Obie Riley and like this urban growth boundary line here where it's crosshatched as the boundary, then that would be one thing. But having it like this is awkward. Yeah, and I said, we have to include the blue areas, and so there's that is disjointed right there. And so I think some continuity there from
all the way over to Obie Riley Road.
Yeah.
Anybody opposed to taking that western boundary over to Obie Riley? So it's a continuous line over along Obie Riley on the west.
Could you just zoom back out? I'm not opposed, but could you just zoom back out to put it in bigger context again? And that blue slab that almost gets us to Tumalo. Why is that?
That's the increased housing density there north of Old Bend Redmond. There's a little subdivision in there. I can't remember what it's called.
Where the blue stops in this revised 2020 blue boundary there, where it stops to the north along US 20, that's just it's kind of right at the top of the grade before you start dropping, down towards the river into Tumalo.
Yeah, I mean, that entity even has their own little water district, right? And, you know,
Okay. So I think we're thinking, go ahead and move that out to include Obi Riley. That little patch. Great.
And then, the last issue is,
It's Tumalo
I
itself.
think, our recommendation, or my recommendation would be that we've got the FAUB, the federal aid urban boundary, just goes to where it shows on the map here, and we can just stop there and leave the MPO boundary where it is as well. And so the federal aid urban boundary would stop at the top of the grade along US 20, but the MPO boundary could still potentially extend into Tumalo if we think that's worthwhile, or we could simply clip the MPO boundary at the federal aid urban boundary at the top of the grade there.
I think I mentioned this the last time. My feeling is right now, I mean, certainly all the things that we've talked about, we need to correct, or we have to, the blue areas, so we should correct them. Some of these other ones make sense. I'm not in favor of touching Tumalo right now, because I think if we touch Tumalo, we need to have a community process, and this just isn't the time out there until, and especially if we can make these changes anytime, let's table that till next year. Not that we have to even bring it back, but that would be my sense is, with all the transportation improvements going out there and a lot of building, it's probably not the time to go out to the public and ask them.
That was that was the potential recommendation, to just leave it as is for now. And then 6 months or a year from now, we can come back and revisit that boundary or that piece of the boundary.
I mean, I think I lean towards, I think I'm okay either way. I lean towards excising it because it seems like kind of an unjustified focus on a very small number of residents. And if we spend this much time including it, I mean, I don't see why we wouldn't in principle want to then talk about other areas too. But I think that I'm fine tabling it for that reason as well. Because I don't think this isn't an opportunity to take a more holistic approach that might include some kind of rationale for the boundary that I don't think we have right now. So I think I like Tyler's suggestion to incorporate the federal aid urban boundary as presented and then leave the MPO boundaries where they are for now.
I guess I would say, I think it is really important for the people of the Tumalo area, to have a chance to engage on this issue, learn about the implications and then provide input. I would be okay with that happening in 6 months or a year, as long as we've mad a firm commitment to doing that. Like it's put on the work plan, we have a kind of timeline when that's going to happen. Because I would hate to just say, yeah, just leave it in right now, and then it just sort of slips away from us. Because I do think it's important for folks in Tumalo to have a chance to say whether they want to be in or out. We're not going to get a unanimous opinion on that, but Tara can share, there's just a lot of planning type things happening in the Tumalo area. And, there's a perception that things are being done to them. And I don't in any way want to perpetuate that.
No, that makes sense to me. And I think part of the work too, right, is why you push it off is, right now, I can't even honestly say what it means for them to be in or out, other than we talk about their issues more. What funding, we can use the roundabout as an example and or the bike ped undercrossing, would they have got it if they weren't in, you know, are there things like that? Does it affect the sewer and district? I mean, I don't think it does, but you know, those type of answers just to be like, well, if you're here, yes, you have more authority over yourselves through Deschutes County, or if it's this, it's not. So I think that's some of the legwork we'll have to do before next year, whenever we want to engage.
Yeah. And, you know, and in a year, the dust will have settled on the roundabout and other things. And, you know, people will have a better perspective on whether those things were actually beneficial or not. When you're right in the middle of construction, it doesn't feel very beneficial.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other question I think that I believe is pretty relevant here is, if people want to see that paved path extend farther west than the old Bend Redmond Highway, what are the, you know, what are the implications of MPO inclusion or not on that question?
Right. Okay. Were there any other discrepancies on the northeast or east side, Andrea?
Think so.
No. Okay. That's good.
Yeah, we're adding that. Here, so. Yeah, this area that we've already discussed.
Yeah.
And then,
Perfect.
making this small adjustment here.
Yeah.
And, but what about, this and this?
Including the entrance to
That-
Shevlin.
Right, that David had brought up, either as part of the MPO boundary or requesting that that be added into the FAUB, FAUB. Although I'm wondering if, and Bob, maybe you can answer this for me. So if ODOT already went in and adjusted, you know, the hatched areas to be the federal aid urban boundary, why weren't these areas that David had mentioned included?
I'm not sure. David, do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, so just to be clear, ODOT didn't, no one on ODOT staff made that initial.
Was that from
recommendation for those areas.
DEA
That's a
recommendation?
Yeah, those are DEA's recommend. Well, it's a little confusing.
Okay,
Those were initially the hashed areas were all DEA's recommendations, and they largely just, if you look what they did, it more or less just aligned the proposed federal aid boundary from the census with the UGB. So if you look across the state, that's essentially what, at least what I perceive, DEA did. What's a little confusing is that if you follow the directions in this map and you make an edit and you propose a new a boundary adjustment or boundary extension, it also shows up as hash marked. It just adds a
okay.
feature to that layer, so it shows up as the same and using the same symbology. But I think for everything in Bend, yeah, the hashed area is what David Evans and Associates has recommended. And I think by and large is just aligning the census boundary with the UGB.
Well, these purple areas, these light purple areas, the 2010 ones that you were talking about, they actually aren't in the UGB, because here I have the UGB layer off, and then if I turn it back on again, it aligns with the existing MPO boundary in this particular area. So I know it's kind of, let me see if I can turn off some other stuff here. Let's see, so UGB is on and then it's off. So it's, you can see that area kind of lighting up. So the UGB is actually, well, except for this.
Yeah, so I think, if you look where the solid blue is, It doesn't, if we're looking at that sliver by like Shevlin or Skyline Ranch Road down south. Like the solid blue doesn't include that. And so, and the UGB does. And so David Evans just hashed that off.
So would we want to potentially edit this to add this to the federal aid urban boundary? Would that be something that the MPO would request to do? I mean, we'd be keeping our boundary, the same here essentially, but for the federal aid urban boundary?
Well, that would be it. I mean, it would be the city making that call. That would be my recommendation, would be.
Just to maintain what was there in 2010.
Right.
Because it's just another situation where you've got, with the smaller boundary, you have, a portion of Putnam Road that's urban, and then it goes to rural. And then, as you continue east, it's back to urban.
What do you think?
I think it's fine. I mean,
Okay.
maintaining that 2010, keeping the geography close to 2010, I think is
Right?
would be our base.
I think we get tired.
That's the take home.
Yeah.
Is we're not going to decrease the border anywhere, the boundary anywhere. We're going to include all of those required areas that are shown in the darkest blue on this map.
And
We are also including the FAUBs. Look at me using that acronym. And we want the expansions that we spoke about earlier down in the south near Highway 97. Is that right?
Yes.
Do we need a motion to say that's what we're doing?
Yeah. So can you stop sharing?
Yeah.
I'll pull up. We have a couple.
All with a commitment that we will go back to Tumalo and do a public process, do public engagement around inclusion or exclusion at a later date.
Yeah, that's something that we can amend into our annual work program. Yeah.
That I would,
David,
could I just say so moved?
I hope so.
Andrea, I just wanted to make one comment. I don't know what the opportunities and constraints are for amending the MPO boundary going forward, but I just want to make sure everyone understands that for the update to the federal aid urban boundary that happens in right now, that doesn't get changed for another 10 years.
that's locked in place.
Yeah. So whatever decision gets made around Tumalo, certainly going forward, there can be additional outreach and conversations with the community, but the outcomes of those conversations won't have any bearing on the boundary until the next, 2033 adjustment.
Thank you, David.
And being included in the federal aid urban boundary basically just means you have access to federal funding.
To federal aid, to the defined urban funding.
but you would be ineligible for federal rural funding.
Federal urban transportation funding.
Correct.
And I might just add, Commissioner Chang said a lot of what I would have said exactly, really. There's kind of one factor that might help with the Tumalo discussion in that as we've redone the Tumalo Community Plan, which is a 20-year kind of long range document that goes out to 2040 at this rate. Working with the community and really just putting together kind of subjective policies and goals. Some are really specific, a lot deal with the sewer. One of the continued refrains, and it's general and high level, but is the community vision statement, where they the exact wording is to try to keep us, a small town rural character, and that was said many different ways in many different levels of energy and excitement, I would say. And while I can't extrapolate that out to say that they were probably intending a 10-year window of kind of a lack of urban character or defined urban sort of settings and features, I think that knowing that they would continue to be available for rural funding and not be susceptible to potentially like urban level design standards would largely fall within kind of what we've gathered generally is the community's feedback at this point. So just to kind of add another layer to what Commissioner Chang had just said, but also maybe speaking to why a 10-year window might not be so far misaligned with what the community's generally expressed so far. So if that's at all helpful for this discussion.
And what rural transportation funding is there?
That's the oddity about this federal aid urban boundary and rural, like all the IIJA rural is defined as less than 200,000 population. So there's different rural, urban. I mean, that's as we applied for grants or other things for US 20, it counts as rural, even though it's in the MPO because our population's low. So I don't think we're getting federal aid urban dollars in Tumalo, or we've been using them for the last, I mean, Chris may know more than I, but I don't think that's any of the funds that's been involved in transportation there.
At the same time, we're not missing out on any rural funding by being included in the federal aid urban boundary either, though.
Not from the rural other definition. I mean, the rural, this rural definition, but I don't know what funding that would, I mean, we haven't been applying for it or,
No. Okay.
Funding that we're.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that.
We're not, yeah.
That's what I'd be curious if Chris, like, hey, we could have never paid for this project 5 years ago because we used this bucket, but that's not Tumalo now.
Right.
Or not the work now.
Okay, we have suggested motions on the screen. Would someone like to make a motion?
I move to approve the proposed federal aid urban boundary as described and discussed previously.
I'll second.
Great. We have a motion from Councilor Mendez and a second from Commissioner Chang. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. And then we have a second motion.
Can I capture the proposed changes
Yes,
as you listed?
yes, as discussed, yes. Right, staff?
Yeah, that's.
Okay.
I move to approve the proposed changes as previously discussed to the Bend MPO boundary to include the revised federal aid urban boundary.
Great. We have a motion from Councilor Mendez and a second from Commissioner Chang. All those in favor? Aye. And that is unanimous as well. Phew, excellent. Next steps. And then we did not put in those motions, but we're directing staff to put in our work plan that we're going to talk to Tumalo. Great, thanks.
Yeah, and I think the timing of that will be, I mean, if we're looking a year-ish from now, that'll be perfect. We'll be wrapping up work on the updated MPO boundary, towards the end of next summer. And then at that point, hopefully the other the projects will be completed out. I mean, the physical construction projects will be done and some of the other planning efforts that are underway out there will be wrapped up. And so then we can, launch into the MPO discussion at that time.
Eric, can you confirm that some of the relevant planning processes around Tumalo will be winding down at that point?
Yeah, I can confirm that. So the Tumalo community plan, focusing on that community, but then also the transportation system plan update, they're both in the middle of planning commission hearings right now. So I can't foresee that even the forthcoming board facing process would extend longer than a year. The only other moving parts or really the only other big moving part was the sewer feasibility study, which also has concluded luckily, and we've incorporated kind of those recommendations into both the TSP and the Tumalo community plan. So yeah, agreed. It would be pretty good alignment. I think we'd honestly might be finishing up a few months earlier than a year out, if not sooner, and be a good time to coordinate again. So yeah.
It's a challenge for you, Commissioner, now to write this date down.
The feasibility study is the feasibility study for wastewater is one thing. The actual progress with the wastewater district could be a roiling sea of drama by a year from now. That's why I was chuckling, but the conclusion of those other planning processes that seems like a good time.
Navigating roiling seas of drama is our job.
I took notes on that, Commissioner Chang. It was very well said. Thank you.
All right, next steps, Tyler.
Yeah, so we will incorporate these edits into the online mapping tool, coordinate that through ODOT's consultant and ODOT staff, and then get that pushed up to the governor. Hopefully we won't, if there are any hiccups along the way, we will report back to you.
Is there any other public process with those changes? Is there a?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
There, David?
Okay.
No, I don't believe so.
All right.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, everyone. That takes us to agenda item number 6, which is an informational item, and it's about e-bikes. So I have been talking to Tyler about this, and one thing is I am the chair of our own MPO here, and I'm also the chair of the statewide Oregon MPO consortium. And I serve on COACT, which is our regional area commission for transportation. And having served on those boards for a while, it seems to me that among those groups, there is so much representation throughout the state. And those groups are required for whatever reason they're required. But from my perspective, we could be doing more. We've got a lot of people from around the state who are required to show up to these meetings. And amongst us all, we might have the ability to actually move policy along. And one of the things that I have been concerned about is just e-bike policy statewide. I feel like there are changes to the technology in the bikes themselves, where we now have different kinds of bikes that do different speeds, and that we don't have good statewide rules around where those bikes are allowed to be. What does that world look like where we're including these different kinds of e-bikes? And again, you guys, this is just me. This is just me, is, trying to look at this from the city of Bend and trying to cooperate with our own parks district. What types of bikes and e-bikes are they allowing on their own paths and trails versus the multi-use paths that we're building at the city of Bend? I think there is just kind of confusion there now. And I wonder if that is something this group, if you even agree with me on that, and if you would like to see this group working to fill that void. There we go.
Well, there's a lot there.
There's so much there. And that's kind of why I think this needs to be the state. We can't just have all of these cities saying, well, on our multi-use paths, it's this versus that, Go ahead, right.
So Representative Levy of House District 53 is interested in leading an effort to overhaul some of the state legislative framework around e-bikes. It has not been updated since 1997. So Oregon used to be at the forefront of e-bikes and has since fallen pretty far behind. And the practical consequence of that is that 2 years ago, Park District rules and regulations, for example, used to say anywhere pedal-only bikes are allowed, also Class 1 e-bikes are allowed. So that would mean no throttle, you can pedal anywhere that on a trail, on a Park District trail, that a pedal-only bike is allowed. Since then, they've updated those rules and regulations to basically say e-bikes are allowed on any trail of any type of e-bike is allowed as defined by state law. Now, the consequence of that is that it's much more permissive because the state law doesn't use the class 1, 2, and 3. It defines it in terms of motor power. It's just this really old, clunky, archaic way of looking at e-bikes. And so the industry has moved on, other states have moved on, but Oregon State has not. So I completely agree there's a need for it. I think the big question mark is what does an ideal policy look like? Because I think if it looked like the rest of the states, we would probably be less restrictive in some areas with respect to age, access, but more restrictive in some other areas in terms of access to things like some of the faster e-bikes. So I haven't seen a comprehensive proposal. I feel like that might be even too much to ask. There's so many other things that are implicated here, and I don't know that Representative Levy is going to want to push for something comprehensive as opposed to saying, let's see if we can just make a few tweaks this time around, in a pretty short time frame. So I don't know. I mean, I think I have individual thoughts about it that, maybe would be worth putting forward and discussing at some point. But so, yeah, I mean, I would be supportive of looking at it further. Absolutely.
Okay. And then from myself, boy, I have no idea what the rules ought to be. It's really not me thinking that I have some plan for what I would. I think that we just need to try and get statewide policy. We need to try and move the state, quote unquote, whatever that means.
And I mean, I think the real rationale, the real problem of our current situation is the status quo is very restrictive on age. So state law says no person under 16 is allowed to ride an e-bike of any kind. Bend Police Department have a hard time enforcing that for just technical reasons. It's, they're not capable and probably not desiring to put a squad car down the Larkspur Trail, for example, pursuing someone. We're not setting up checkpoints. And there's probably an opportunity to say there is a safe way for young riders to ride certain kinds of e-bikes, but state law doesn't allow that. And so in the meantime, there's been this proliferation of lots of young riders, some of whom are riding in pretty unsafe ways, others who are riding in perfectly safe ways. And this means that the school district doesn't want to get involved because they don't feel like they have the guidance to actually say what should a principal tell a family that has a kid show up on an e-bikes.
Mm.
So I feel like there's dilemmas all around, but that you kind of hit the nail on the head. This is really a state level issue.
Okay.
And I think they're looking for guidance.
Okay. Phil, any thoughts, comments?
I don't, similarly, I understand it's an issue. I don't really understand how you grab hold of it. And who should be grabbing hold of it. I mean, it does seem like there's an important role for the state in clarifying a regular, laying that the broad contours of regulatory framework here. And then, it would be great to have at the local level, training and education and, maybe kind of a next tier of rules around this as well. But at minimum, we need, rule structure from at the state level to start with. So I don't actually know whether the MPO is kind of a key player in that. Maybe OMPOC is,
I honestly was envisioning more voices talking to state representatives, to state officials saying, we need to figure this out, right? I really am not proposing, I think the Bend MPO should lead the charge to have this, and this. I just feel like if this is something the Bend MPO is interested in, I can then go to OMPOC and say, this is something we discussed at our own MPO. Is there some way for OMPOC to, just get that voice to the right people, try and support whoever, we know this is a hard job, but you got to do it level of, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated for us. So Representative Levy, following the forum, there's a white paper circulating with sort of problem statements, a lot that were talked about at the forum from what you had mentioned, but also insurance issues, right? Not just the definition of what class 1, 2, and 3 means and having consistency across the state, but what other Oregon statutes are involved? How does it affect, or what laws, if you create laws around age and type and where they can be, then, what else is that triggering? And so we've been asked not to share as they're kind of work through the backdrop. But I think as time goes on, I think that's going to be public, and it's just a matter of, can we see what it is? Or, throughout the policy boards, right? And be like, oh, is there influence? Or wait a second, why is it that way type of nexus? I don't think we're going to have to push anything.
Okay.
There's going to be legislation proposed at the short session in January. Now it's just a matter of
Great.
what is it? And then how soon do people get to see it and kind of vet it? Because I think half the problem, and everyone captured it, is you can't really identify the problem statement, because most people would want a 12-year-old to ride an e-bike to school versus making another trip for the parents, right? Yet it's illegal now. And so, but where do you put that line, and how do you, whether there's enforcement side of it or not, but what's that right issue? But I've seen some of the document. They asked not to share it yet, but certainly I imagine out of her office, she's probably going to be sharing it soon, because it's really been her sponsorship, just trying to clarify some of the, legalese behind the scenes with us.
Great. Thank you very much. I feel like just this quick little conversation puts me in a better place in advance of the last regular session. We worked on legislative priorities and lobbying for our priorities. And it was just hard to do without kind of a head start. This to me is kind of a head start, that, this is something we're looking for. We hope that in the short session, there will be legislation about this that we can support. And when that happens, we'll be closer to those letters going to our reps saying, we're so glad you're doing this. It's really important. Maybe
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at.
Well, I would think so. I mean, I think these are what the short session's for, right?
Great.
Correcting these types of issues
Yeah.
that come up. It shouldn't have a big funding amount tied to it.
Right.
Anything other than education, right? Or
Uh-huh.
something like that. So you would think, but
Rules.
just like anything, there's going to be opposition from someone. And so it's probably more around support
Mhm.
and ensuring that, Central Oregon at least is behind it, or what changes may need to be made so that you can support it from an elected official
Mhm.
standpoint.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's definitely a need for it and that not addressing it is hamstrings, school districts, hamstrings, park districts.
Yes.
I think we really need the clarity and guidance on it.
Thank you. Thanks. Tyler, any comments from staff? Any?
No, I think it'd be worth sharing for you to, get this on the agenda for the next OMPOC meeting,
Yes,
probably I think it's maybe September.
I think so. Yes,
Just get that, we at least have a discussion item there.
exactly.
Part of, as you mentioned, if OMPOC is gonna have legislative priorities that they discussed for the short session, is it something I'm assuming this is an issue in the other MPO areas around the state. And so having them step up and get behind that, I think would be worthwhile.
I think so too. Great. Thank you, everyone. That's great. Thanks. All right, that'll bring us on to item number 7, which is other business, safety outreach update. Tyler, do you want to talk about that? Want me to talk about that?
I can just give a quick update on that.
Okay.
We have some safety outreach funding in hand, but due to staffing limitations, the money's just been sitting there. It's grant funding from ODOT's safety division.
Mhm.
We are trying to get an IGA in place right now with COIC to have them help us expend some of those funds during our current grant cycle, and then also work with our partners to develop for the next grant cycle. ODOT has said that we would be eligible and will likely get funding in the next grant cycle. And so we're going to try and get some money expended around safety messaging between now and the end of September, and then also lay the groundwork for the application for the next round of funding for safety education outreach. So that's the status right now.
That's great.
COIC is actually doing a lot of work right now on this and have been reaching out to partners. There's a lot of work that is already underway in both. The 2 leaders in the state are Lane County and Clackamas County. And so COIC staff's been reaching out to them and then looking at what are our media options that we have, and what are the advance times to get, utilize those different media outlets. And so we will have, hopefully, I think by next week, a pretty good understanding of what we're gonna be able to do in this very short amount of time that we have left for this current grant cycle, and then also laying the groundwork for the next cycle.
Hey, or Tyler, if I can, or you mentioned staffing, I was just curious if any update on your staffing.
Oh, yes, we've actually hired someone
Oh,
and she will be starting,
Next Friday.
today will be her first day.
Yeah. So, yeah,
Congratulations.
great.
person that takes over Hobie's old position. So, yeah, she'll be taking over the MTIP stuff and then,
You couldn't get rid of that.
oh, man. Yeah, that'll be the first, no, I'm just kidding. So, yeah. happy
We are
to-
really, her name's Kelly Kennedy, really looking forward to having her
Okay.
on board.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we've been floundering, on a lot of things that, we did a lot of different, had her hands in a lot of different things and, gave her a lot of independence, to make sure that those pieces of our, the MPO puzzle were getting done, and trying to dig back through that and understand how things are laid out and how things are done. It's been a challenge.
Challenging. How people store it.
Oh, yeah.
They've done, I mean,
Is the new person from Central Oregon or?
yeah, she lives here in Bend. So
Oh.
her prior job was with COCC. I think she was administering certain classes in
Yeah.
a department. And then prior to that, actually, I don't remember, but she has a significant amount of admin experience, budget, contracts,
Okay.
running meetings.
So it's like,
Yeah,
she'll be right out of the gate. She's gonna be really strong on the administrative things, which is what we really need right now. And then we will then over time, bring her up to speed on all the transportation things that we deal with.
Okay, no, that's great.
Great. Yes, I believe that while this summer of safety is turning into late August and September of safety, I do think it is setting us up to be in excellent shape for next year's grant and continuing on, having a more ongoing summers of safety, all years safety, safety all the time. I'll start working on my marketing for that. Okay, how about Dutch Cycling Embassy debrief? Don't look at me.
No, I'm happy to share a little bit
Yeah,
about it.
please.
So I do think there is going to be a more formal synopsis that is provided, and I'd be happy to circulate that when I receive it. I mean, you might receive it before I do.
Oh.
But yeah.
Well, I'd just like to see.
I think it will be disseminated as widely as possible because I think it was actually a really helpful couple-day workshops. I participated in some of the workshops. We had our joint city council meeting with Redmond that prevented us from participating in some of them. But I think the two big takeaways. One was that, any plan that you have for people who aren't driving, whether they're walking or using mobility scooters or riding bikes, also has to have a plan for people who are driving. And pairing those two together can often yield better results than the approach that we often see, which is to kind of prioritize driving with more lanes and using our right of way to achieve that goal. And it ends up being short-sighted in the long run. So it kind of undermines the goal of driving. So the three particular takeaways were, it is important to complete the north-south and east-west bikeway in Bend to achieve the greatest level of comfort and safety for anybody on that. Continue investments in the greenway system. So try to improve that because it's so extensive in terms of the residential areas. And then keep the level of protection that we have in terms of bike lane standards and buffered bike lanes, and try to raise them whenever we have the opportunity. So those were the three takeaways, but look for a more formal report that will include, I think, design ideas around specific projects. And I'm sure there's, these were kind of brainstorming ideas, but really interesting ideas, designs that I'd never seen before, that you can see how, by creating parking areas, you can reallocate parts of the right of way to also create separated, expanded place for people walking and biking, and then also create a queuing area to store vehicles who are turning and stuff. And that allows people who are driving through to keep moving through without stopping. And I think that I initially might not have thought about, there's a lot of benefits to keeping people driving without stopping. But if they're going at a slow pace and you create all these other benefits, it's actually a really cool idea. So it seems like lots of good stuff. And I hope to share that report shortly.
I really like their design standards around the roundabouts. And especially when you took the drawings of, say, Bend's roundabouts, and then you overlaid the Dutch design standards and how it benefited drivers and cyclists, and especially when it came to safety and maneuvering as a cyclist.
Yeah.
That was something that stuck in my mind.
Yeah. Really, really cool stuff. So I think that it will hopefully have a big impact.
And then there were a couple of public events, weren't there?
Yeah,
Were
yeah,
I was out of town, but were they well attended?
absolutely. Yes, I was able to attend just the first kickoff, I think it was, in council chambers, absolutely full of folks interested. It was fantastic to see City Hall with bikes everywhere attached, locked to anything anybody could find. So many folks had come to City Hall on bikes.
Okay.
And then the really big public event.
Was it the tower?
We had the conflict that.
That was what we couldn't do, yeah.
But I heard similarly good things about it.
Good.
So I think it was very well attended.
Yeah, I think I went to all the public events and they were, I mean, talk about having people that were, you had everyone's full attention.
Yes,
I think that
yes.
happens, that doesn't happen all that often. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. I heard something that I have said in Bend over the last, say, decade. Back when Bend was maybe more conservative, had fewer bicycles on the road, that this isn't just about giving the bikes a place. If you're able to separate them, that is actually making things easier and safer for the cars. That this, the cars want this bike infrastructure in order to get these bikes out of their way. You know what I mean, is how I describe it sometimes, depending on the audience.
An
And-
overpass or an underpass can benefit someone driving because now they're not waiting for a light to change where people are walking across or
That's
biking across. So there's lots of benefits.
That's right. And I've all been paying attention for many years. I don't know how long ago I learned that UPS, they use their computers to figure out the routes, and they avoid left turns at all costs, which is my own driving strategy. And they also, in part of this computer programming, was that just don't sit at intersections. It's at intersections where the worst greenhouse gases are being emitted. That's when most cars are the least efficient, is when they're just sitting there. And and those are the dangerous places, are the intersections. And I just thought that is so smart. And then what did they say? They said that they were actually able to fund a bike ped project with like congestion money, with, I guess their money is like ours and it's in these different buckets, and they have safety money and congestion money, but they were able to make the case that this new infrastructure for bikes and pedestrians will take so many cars that it's actually a project to reduce congestion for automobiles. I just feel that, to me, that is the message to the public. It's not us versus them. There are no bad guys and good guys here. It's not a war on cars. There's no war. We need to be able to share these spaces better. And the better we share, the better it is for everyone. And, I feel like that's where, I'm hearing the public in our own communities. Speaking of COACT, they're the nicest gentleman from Crook County and the other one. And their comment was that ODOT is spending all of their money on bike ped facilities, and there's just nothing left for cars and trucks. And, that's kind of living here on the edge of the, prairie. So I really liked the way they themselves, who were, to me are very much bike ped advocates, that they see this need to bring everybody along and cooperate, and rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Rising toad lifts all boats. Rising tide lifts all toads and boats. All right. Any topic requests for our next board meeting?
Not necessarily a topic request, but where are we in the transportation safety action plan update that we talked about a couple meetings ago.
Well,
What's the timeline for that?
well, we're seeking grant funding to do that, and we should hear awards are supposed to be announced in October.
Okay.
And so, keeping our fingers crossed that we get grant funding to do that. If we get grant funding, we're going to be able to do a really big safety action plan update. If we don't, we will, I think, still be able to do we'll be able to do a smaller update to it. And we will do that concurrently with the update to our long range plan.
Okay.
So.
Great.
Fingers crossed.
We were going to ask City of Bend, David Abbas specifically to
Yes.
come in and talk to us about the funding that the City of Bend gets from the MPO. We haven't had any kind of an update in years about where is that money actually going. When we made the decision to make just a single contribution to the city, it was with the city promising that they would continue, for example, to put green paint in some bike lanes near the intersections. And so that's all that is. I was hoping we would be able to do that at some point. Any other topic? You can always get in touch with myself or Tyler or Andrea about that. And our next meeting of the policy board is September 15th. It will be right here in this room at noon. That gives us one last chance for public comment. If anyone would like to make a comment? With seeing none, I will adjourn this meeting of the Bend MPO. Thanks, everybody. Good meeting. Lots of big topics in today's meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Did you want to give an update on the transportation or City of Bend transportation fee discussions at the next?
Oh, that's probably a good
Yeah, or
idea.
maybe 3 or 4 months from now, whenever
Okay.
it's not a problem. Yeah.
Sure. No, that's a good idea, Bob. Yeah.
Would people want to, hear about what's in the county TSP?
Yeah.
What that's within the MPO area? Kind of, is that that might be, because the TSP is kind of nearing an end of draft point.
Okay, I think that's a good idea.
That might be a thing.
Sounds good.
Good.